deviate just a little bit, and I'd like to introduce a longtime friend, Chip Parmelly, who's come up from Princeton this morning, and I'd like him to talk a little bit about who he is, what he does, and I hope you find this interesting because I do. You can use this one if you'd like.
Thank you very much, Les. I sort of got hit with this a few minutes ago, I think out of compassion for my long trip here this morning. I was up at, I think, 3:15. I left the house at 5. But a little bit about myself. I guess I met Les maybe 3 years ago through a mutual friend. And I work with what was a family business, which my father started in 1953 in New York. It was an insurance brokerage firm. And he had done a short stint at Chubb right out of Princeton and then started his own firm. And I joined in 1977. And I had the good fortune of meeting a VC about a year into my career at my country club. And this was when the venture community was very much of a cottage industry. And they were looking for a new broker. So up until that point, really, our firm was sort of all over the lot. I mean, we had manufacturing companies, we had service companies, we had distribution companies, food service companies. And this VC started introducing me to their portfolio companies. And back then, most of the venture funds were generalists. I mean, they would invest in medical devices and drug discovery, drug delivery, data hardware, software, pretty much everything and anything. As a matter of fact, this particular fund even invested in a racquetball club of all things, which was a write-off ultimately. But so they liked my enthusiasm, and I was then introduced to another fund, also down in the Princeton area. And that fund, many of you probably know today, which is one of the top tier, is called Accel Partners. They're a California, London-based fund now, but the founding general partner is still a very close friend, and they're still a client. And I saw this as an interesting business model because my theory was that if I'm doing business with the fund, and now I can get introductions to their portfolio companies, you theoretically have an annuity built in as long as you do a good job. So this was circa probably 1980, 81. Built up the portfolio to where we now have about 50 venture funds that we work with. I would say logistically from Boston to Washington and a few in other parts of the country. And in around the early 90s, I met an entrepreneur. I was telling Joe over here, I met an entrepreneur at an event like this, and he was looking for money. And, I'm not an intermediary or a banker or anything like that, but I liked this guy. And this was at a Chamber of Commerce function. And the guy was obviously extremely bright, very aggressive, and very drunk. And but I kind of liked his chutzpah. And so I gave him my card, and he's looking at it, and he sees insurance, employee benefits. He said, well, how are you going to help me? He said, my wife is petrified that I'm going to blow all my 401k money, which I pay the tax on, to start this company. So I said, well, send me some information about what you do. He had a database software tool, which anybody who's in the software business today knows probably about a tool called Irwin. And anyway, this fellow, Ben Cohen, had founded this company and designed the tool. And I introduced him to some funding sources, and the company just took off. They grew to about probably $200 million in sales. Morgan Stanley took them public. We were their broker. We did everything for them. And I said to myself, well, here's a way, El Chipo, where you can reciprocate to the VCs who up to this point have been so generous to you and also help out the entrepreneur. And so we started, my brother and I and one of our Boston guys, we started doing more and more of this. And then we said in the mid-90s, we really ought to become investors too. We ought to get some skin in the game. So in probably 95, 96, we invested in our first fund, which was an energy fund. And then in 2000, we went into a sort of a broad-based fund, which does software, optics, devices, number of other things. And then in 2006, we went into a healthcare fund, which does not do drugs, but devices, healthcare IT, which of course is very she right now, and healthcare services. And we then re-upped in their next fund last December. And then we're also in a fund which Les knows quite well up in Albany, High Peaks Venture Partners, who we've had a wonderful relationship with. They've just had a first closing on their second fund. We were a little bit late on getting into Fund 1. So we have some skin in the game, and then my brother and I are also members of the Tech Valley Angel Network, which is an Albany angel group which meets monthly. And we've done some direct investing through that. Any success, I would say, to be quite frank with you, has been pure luck. So we spend about, between the three of us, who are really the finders within our company, we spend probably about 60 to 70% of our time really trying to help companies find funding sources. And what that leads to is it becomes very much of a sort of a catalyst for our insurance business when the companies get funded ultimately. But we're very, very patient because we recognize that the startup world is very risky. We have had to become much more sophisticated in this process because we obviously don't want to cheapen ourselves with the venture folks who are clients and friends, and we don't want to flood their inboxes with deals that they're never going to touch. But where our sort of value proposition is, we know which funds have money, we know where they invest, what industries, bite size, logistics, whether the market is more important to a particular fund versus the management team. And it's been just a great ride. So and that's really led to when companies get term sheets, usually the first two things that they need to do is they need to get D&O insurance and they need to get the guys insured for key man purposes, and we do that, and then that leads into all the other different services that we provide as the companies grow organically. So this is what I do, and are there any questions? It's a little sexy, I guess, for an insurance broker, but that's the pitch.
This has been a long time coming. Getting to know Chip and his brother and working with his company for a bunch of years now, this is an opportunity for our companies to attain funding. And there's not one of our companies that's not looking for funding and getting closer to the Tech Valley Angels, getting closer to Chip, getting closer to actual funding, which there's been a dearth of funding here in the Hudson Valley, I think is going to be a plus for all of us and all of our companies. Chip, thanks a million for coming. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks, Les.